The old classroom smelled of dust and metal polish. 20 young Zephyrian cadets sat in neat rows, their forearms folded across their desks. Their instructor stood at the front of the room, but he was not like them. Where they had 4 strong arms, he had only 2. Where their faces were smooth and unmarked, his was covered in deep scars that ran from his forehead to his neck. HFY looked at each student before he spoke. His voice was rough, like gravel scraping against stone. "You think you know about war," he said. "You have read your books. You have watched your training videos. You believe the Galactic Coalition is the strongest force in the universe." One cadet raised his hand. "Sir, are we not the most powerful military force known to exist?" HFY made a sound that might have been laughter, but there was no joy in it. "I thought the same thing 20 years ago. I was young like you. I believed our ships were unbeatable. I believed our weapons were the best. I believed any species that stood against us would fall quickly." He moved to the window that looked out over the military academy grounds. Below them, thousands of young aliens trained for war. They moved in perfect formation, their weapons gleaming in the sunlight. "Then we met the humans," HFY said. The room became very quiet. Every cadet knew this story, but only from the official reports. They had never heard it from someone who was there. HFY turned back to face them. It was supposed to be simple. The humans lived on one small planet in a system with 9 worlds. Our scouts said they had basic space travel, simple weapons, and no real military. High Command expected the conquest to take 3 days. He walked between the desks, his footsteps echoing in the silent room. "I was a ship commander then. My vessel was part of the first wave. We had 50 dreadnoughts, the largest ships in our fleet. Each one could destroy a city. We also had 200 cruisers and 500 fighters. Against us, the humans had maybe 30 ships, all smaller than our smallest cruiser." HFY stopped at the front of the room again. "We sent them the standard surrender message. Join the coalition peacefully or face destruction. Most species choose to join. It is the smart choice." "What did the humans say, sir?" asked a cadet. "They said no." HFY's scarred face showed something that might have been respect. "Not just no. They said they would rather die free than live as slaves. Their commander, a human named Jake Morrison, sent us a message back. He said if we wanted their world, we would have to take it from their cold, dead hands." The cadets looked confused. This was not how wars usually started. Most species negotiated. They found ways to avoid fighting. "We laughed," HFY continued. "What could 30 small ships do against our fleet? Admiral Zekmoth ordered the attack. We would show these humans what happened when they defied the coalition." HFY moved to a large screen on the wall. With his remaining good arm, he activated it. A star chart appeared showing the human solar system. The humans did not come out to meet us in open space as we expected. Instead, they hid behind their moon. We thought they were cowards, afraid to face us in real battle. We were wrong. The star chart changed, showing ship movements. Red dots representing coalition forces moved toward the blue dots that were human ships. When we came around the moon, the humans were ready. But they did not fight like any enemy we had ever faced. A normal species would try to match our formation, fight ship to ship, try to win through superior tactics or technology. HFY pointed to the screen. The humans did something else, something terrible and beautiful and completely insane. They charged straight at us. The cadets leaned forward in their seats. This was not in any of their textbooks. Their lead ship was called the Independence. Commander Morrison was aboard. It was damaged. Maybe half its weapons gone. Engines failing. Any sane commander would have retreated. Morrison aimed his ship straight at our flagship and accelerated. HFY's voice became quieter. "We thought it was a mistake. No one rams. A ship on purpose. It destroys both vessels." But as the Independence got closer, Morrison sent us another message. He said, "Remember this day. Remember that humans do not surrender." The room was so quiet that the cadets could hear their own breathing. The Independence hit Admiral Zekmoth's ship at full speed. Both ships exploded. 3,000 coalition soldiers died in that moment, including our fleet commander. But so did Morrison and his entire crew. They killed themselves to kill us. 1. Cadet raised her hand. Sir, that makes no sense. Why would they waste their lives like that? Kethavar looked at her for a long moment. Because they were not fighting for glory or conquest. They were fighting for their families, their children, their freedom. When you fight for those things, death is not the worst thing that can happen to you. He turned back to the screen. But Morrison's sacrifice was just the beginning. With our admiral dead and our formation broken, the other human ships attacked. They used tactics we had never seen. They rammed our ships. They flew their fighters directly into our weapon batteries. They turned their own vessels into bombs. The screen showed more ship movements, but now the red dots were scattered and confused while the blue dots moved with deadly purpose. One human pilot, a woman named Maya Rodriguez, flew her damaged fighter into the engine core of one of our dreadnoughts. She could have ejected. She could have saved herself. Instead, she stayed with her ship and guided it home. The dreadnought exploded, taking 1,000 coalition soldiers with it. Kethavar sat down heavily in his chair. His missing arms seemed to ache as he remembered. By the end of the first day, we had lost 15 dreadnoughts and over 100 smaller ships. The humans had lost everything, every ship, every pilot. But they had also shown us something that terrified us more than any weapon. He looked at each cadet again. They had shown us that some things are more powerful than the fear of death. They had shown us what happens when you fight people who love something more than they love their own lives. The old warrior stood up slowly. That was just the first day. The real war was yet to come. Outside the window, the sun was setting over the academy grounds. In the growing darkness, Kethavar's scars seemed deeper, and his eyes held memories that would never fade. The next morning, Kethavar found the cadets already in their seats when he arrived. Word had spread through the academy about his first lecture. Now more students had come to listen. They filled every chair and stood along the walls. Kethavar set down his teaching materials and looked at the eager faces. Yesterday I told you about the space battles. Today I will tell you about something worse. The ground wars. He activated the wall screen again. This time it showed a planet covered in green and blue. Cities dotted the surface like tiny lights. After we lost so many ships above Earth, High Command decided on a different approach. We would invade their colonies first, weaken them before attacking their homeworld. Kethavar pointed to several smaller planets on the display. The humans had settled on dozens of worlds. Most had only a few million people. We thought they would be easy targets. A cadet raised her hand. Sir, how many troops did we send? 4. The first colony world, we sent 2 million soldiers. The planet had maybe 50,000 human defenders. Kethavar's voice was flat. We should have won in hours. The screen changed to show troop movements on a planet's surface. Red markers showed coalition forces landing in multiple locations. The planet was called New Texas. It had farms, small cities, mining operations. Nothing special. We expected the humans to gather in their cities and try to defend them. That is what any normal species would do. Kethavar began pacing again, his remaining arm gesturing as he spoke. The humans did not defend their cities. When our ships arrived, the cities were already empty. Every human had vanished into the wilderness. Where did they go? Asked a young cadet. Everywhere and nowhere. They scattered across the entire planet. Then they began to hunt us. The screen showed new images. Thick forests, deep caves, mountain ranges that stretched to the horizon. I was there with the 3rd Landing Force. We secured the capital city without a single shot fired. Empty buildings, abandoned streets. We thought the humans had run away in fear. Kethavar stopped pacing and faced the students. We were wrong. The first attack came at night. A human woman crawled through the sewers under our command post. She had explosives strapped to her body. When she reached the main generator, she triggered them. The explosion killed her and 30 of our soldiers. It also left us without power or communications. The cadets stirred uneasily. Suicide attacks were not unknown in galactic warfare, but they were rare. That was just the beginning. Every day brought new attacks. Humans would appear from nowhere, strike fast, then disappear again. They used weapons we had never seen. Homemade bombs hidden in food supplies, poison in our water, traps that turned our own vehicles against us. Kethavar moved to the window, looking out at the peaceful academy grounds. One human, a young male, named Danny Chen, turned the entire city into a weapon. He rigged buildings to collapse when we entered them. He poisoned the air in underground tunnels. He made every street corner a potential death trap. But sir, interrupted a cadet, they were fighting their own people's city. Why would they destroy it? Kethavar turned back to the class. Because they understood something we did not. A city can be rebuilt. Freedom cannot be given back once it is lost. The screen showed footage from the campaign. Coalition soldiers moved carefully through rubble-filled streets, always watching for the next attack. The worst part was not knowing where they were. We had sensors that could detect any normal enemy. But humans learned to hide from our technology. They covered themselves in mud to block heat sensors. They moved through water to avoid motion detectors. They became ghosts. Kethavar sat down, his scarred face showing the strain of memory. 3 months into the invasion, we held every major city on New Texas, but we controlled nothing. The humans owned the night. They owned the wilderness. They owned the fear in our soldiers' hearts. Then came the incident that broke our unit's morale completely. His voice became quieter. We found a human field hospital hidden in the mountains. Our orders were to destroy it and capture any survivors. The screen showed aerial footage of a small medical facility built into a cave system. The hospital was defended by one human, a woman named Lisa Patterson. She was a medic, not a soldier. When our forces surrounded the hospital, she could have surrendered. The medical staff could have been treated as prisoners of war. Kethavar stood up slowly. Instead, Patterson sent the other medical workers deeper into the caves with the wounded. Then she stood at the entrance with a rifle and told our commander that she would not let us pass. 1 human against 200 coalition soldiers. A cadet sounded disbelieving. 1 human who had decided that some things were worth dying for. Kethavar nodded. Patterson fought us for 18 hours. Every time we advanced, she drove us back. She used medical supplies as weapons. Surgical lasers became sniper rifles. Oxygen tanks became bombs. She turned healing tools into instruments of war. The room was completely silent now. She could have escaped dozens of times. The cave system had many exits. But she stayed at her post because wounded humans were behind her. She would not abandon them. Kethavar's voice cracked slightly. When we finally broke through, Patterson was still alive. Barely. She was covered in blood, most of it her own. 3 of her limbs were broken. But she still held her weapon. What happened to her? Whispered a cadet. Our commander, General Vextar, walked up to her. He expected her to beg for mercy or try to bargain for her life. Instead, Patterson looked him in the eye and said, "Did I buy them enough time?" She was not asking about her own survival. She was asking if the wounded had escaped. Kethavar moved back to the screen, which now showed a map of the cave system. General Vextar had been a soldier for 40 years. He had conquered 17 worlds. But he told me later that looking into that human's eyes was the most terrifying moment of his life. Not because she was dangerous, but because she was not afraid. She had already accepted death, so there was nothing left to threaten her with. The general ordered his medics to treat Patterson's wounds. He could not bring himself to kill someone who fought so bravely for others. But she died anyway, 3 days later. Her body had taken too much damage. The cadets looked stunned. This was not how wars were supposed to work. Enemies were supposed to fear death, to surrender when faced with overwhelming force. Patterson's last words were to ask if the wounded humans had reached safety. When told they had, she smiled and closed her eyes. She died happy, knowing she had saved lives. Kethavar turned off the screen and faced the class. That single human medic cost us more than enemy soldiers ever could. Word of her sacrifice spread through our forces. Many soldiers began to question why we were fighting people who cared more about others than themselves. General Vextar requested immediate transfer off New Texas. So did half his officers. They said they could not continue a war against people who turned healers into heroes. The old warrior looked at each cadet in turn. We eventually took New Texas, but it cost us 8 months and nearly 500,000 casualties. A planet with 50,000 defenders should have fallen in days. Instead, it became our first lesson in what humans call fighting for something bigger than yourself. Tomorrow, Kethvar said as he gathered his materials, I will tell you about the day we learned that humans could fight with more than just weapons. I will tell you about the war inside our own minds. The students filed out slowly, their faces troubled. Outside, the sun was shining, but somehow the world seemed a little darker than it had that morning. The classroom was packed again. Word about Kethvar's lectures had spread beyond the academy. Some of the older instructors had come to listen. They sat in the back, their faces serious. They remembered the war too. Kethvar looked at the crowd and nodded. I see more faces today. Good. What I am about to tell you needs to be heard by as many as possible. He moved to the front of the room, his footsteps echoing in the silence. For the past 2 days, I have told you about human weapons and human tactics. Today I will tell you about their most dangerous weapon of all, the human mind. The screen lit up, showing communication signals flowing between planets. 6 months into the war, our forces were struggling on every front. We had superior technology, more ships, more soldiers. But we were losing. High Command needed to understand why. Kethvar pointed to the screen. They sent specialists to study human behavior. What they found changed everything. A cadet near the front raised his hand. Sir, what did they discover? They discovered that humans do not just fight with their bodies. They fight with ideas, with emotions, with things that cannot be seen or measured. Kethvar activated another display. The humans had a captain named Ryan Walsh. He was not a soldier in the normal sense. He was a specialist in something they called psychological operations. The screen showed a human male with short brown hair and calm eyes. He looked ordinary, like any human might. Nothing about him seemed dangerous. Captain Walsh never fired a weapon during the entire war. He never commanded a ship or led troops into battle, but he caused more damage to our forces than any human general. Kethvar's voice carried a note of grudging respect. Walsh fought a war inside our minds. How is that possible? Asked an instructor from the back. Kethvar smiled, but it was not a pleasant expression. He knew us better than we knew ourselves. Walsh had studied every species in the coalition. He understood our fears, our weaknesses, our cultural beliefs. Then he used that knowledge against us. The screen changed to show intercepted communications between coalition ships. It started small, messages appearing on our communication networks that should not have been there. At first, we thought it was a technical problem, random data corruption. But the messages were not random. Kethvar read from the display. A message sent to Zephyrian troops said, Your eggs are growing cold while you fight for others. To Kraxan soldiers, the mountain spirits weep for your dishonor. To Veterantiy fighters, your ancestors turned their backs on this shameful war. The cadets looked confused. The messages seemed harmless. You do not understand because you are young. But those messages struck at the heart of what each species holds sacred. Zephyrians believe that leaving eggs unguarded brings bad luck. Kraxans fear dishonoring their ancestors above all else. Veterantiy think mountain spirits judge their actions. An older instructor nodded slowly. The humans were turning our own beliefs against us. Exactly. But Walsh was just getting started. Kethvar moved to another display. He had help from a human scientist named Amanda Foster. She studied our psychology, our behavior patterns, our social structures. Together, they created something called the Mirror Protocol. The screen showed footage of coalition prisoners in human camps. Dr. Foster interviewed every coalition prisoner. She asked them about their families, their homes, their reasons for fighting. Then she did something unexpected. She showed them recordings from Earth. What kind of recordings? Asked a cadet. Human families, human children playing in gardens, Human parents tucking their young into bed, human couples sharing meals together. Kethavar's voice became quiet. Foster showed our soldiers that humans were not monsters. They were people fighting to protect the same things we were supposed to be protecting. The room was very still. Some of the older instructors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The effect was immediate. Coalition soldiers began to question the war. If humans were just protecting their families like any normal species would, then what were we doing? Why were we trying to destroy them? Kethavar activated another screen. But the worst was yet to come. Walsh and Foster created something they called the Sound of Earth Project. What was that, sir? They broadcast sounds from their home world across our communication networks. Not words or messages, just sounds. Kethavar closed his eyes as if remembering. The laughter of human children, music played on strange instruments, the sound of wind through Earth's forests, ocean waves hitting beaches, birds singing in the morning. Why was that dangerous? A young cadet sounded puzzled. Because it was beautiful. Kethavar opened his eyes and looked at the student. We had been told that humans were savage, violent, evil, but their world sounded peaceful. It sounded like a place worth protecting. The screen showed data charts with declining numbers. Within 2 weeks of the first broadcast, coalition forces experienced massive defections. Entire units refused to fight. Some ships turned around and went home. Others requested transfer to non-combat roles. My own unit was not immune. I remember the night we first heard human music. It was unlike anything in our culture. Soft, haunting, full of emotion. One of my soldiers, a young Kraxan named Zekdal, began to cry. He said the music reminded him of his mother's voice. Kethavar sat down heavily. That was the night I realized we were not fighting a war of conquest. We were fighting a war of destruction. The coalition had decided that anything beautiful enough to create such music was too dangerous to exist. The room was completely silent now. Even the older instructors seemed troubled by what they were hearing. Walsh had one more weapon in his arsenal. He called it the Family Project. The screen showed images of coalition soldiers with their own families. Foster had learned something important about our psychology. Every species in the coalition fought better when they believed they were protecting their loved ones. So what did the humans do? Whispered a cadet. They reminded us that we had families too. They broadcast images of coalition soldiers reuniting with their young after previous wars. They showed us recordings of our own people celebrating victories, holding their children, sharing joy together. Kethavar stood and moved to the window. Outside, young aliens were training for future conflicts. The message was clear. Every coalition soldier who died in this war was someone's child, someone's parent, someone's beloved. Every human who died was the same. The war was not between good and evil. It was between two groups of people who loved their families. That is when the real psychological damage began. Our soldiers started to see human faces in their dreams. They imagined human children crying for their parents. They wondered if the humans they killed had families waiting for them to come home. An instructor in the back spoke up. How do you fight an enemy who makes you see them as people? You cannot. Kethavar turned back to face the room. That was Walsh's greatest weapon. He did not make us afraid of humans. He made us see them as worthy of life. Once you see your enemy as a thinking, feeling being with hopes and dreams and people who love them, war becomes impossible. The Coalition High Command tried to counter the psychological warfare. They banned human broadcasts, restricted communications, punished soldiers who showed sympathy for the enemy, but it was too late. The damage was done. Kethavar looked at each face in the room. By the end of the first year, we had lost more soldiers to psychological breakdown than to human weapons. Captain Walsh had proven something that changed warfare, forever. The mind is the most important battlefield of all. Tomorrow, he said as he began to gather his materials, I will tell you about the day the war ended, about the moment when we realized that the humans had been fighting for something we could not defeat, something that made them stronger than any weapon we possessed. The students and instructors filed out slowly, their faces thoughtful. Many of them looked troubled, as if they were seeing the world differently than they had that morning. Outside, the window. The sun was setting again, and somewhere in the darkness, old ghosts of war stirred in the memories of those who had lived through humanity's strangest victory. On the fifth and final day, the classroom could not hold everyone who came to listen. The lecture was moved to the Academy's main auditorium. Thousands of beings filled the seats. Military officers, government leaders, teachers, and students from across the planet had come to hear how the story ended. Kethvar stood on the stage looking out at the sea of faces. He had told this story many times over the years, but never to so many people at once. 20 years ago, the war ended. Today, I will tell you what happened next. I will tell you how humans changed everything we thought we knew about peace. His voice carried clearly through the auditorium speakers. The massive screen behind him showed images of human and coalition ships working together in space. The ceasefire lasted only 3 days before something unexpected happened. Coalition planets began asking for human help. Kethvar moved across the stage, his missing arms more noticeable in the bright lights. The first request came from Zephyria Prime. A plague had struck our agricultural colonies. Traditional medicine was not working. He pointed to the screen, which showed human medical ships arriving at alien worlds. Dr. Amanda Foster, the same human who had studied our psychology during the war, arrived with a team of human doctors. They worked alongside Zephyrian healers to stop the plague. No one asked them to come. They simply heard about suffering and decided to help. A voice from the audience called out, "Why would they help people who had tried to destroy them?" Kethvar smiled, and for the first time in 5 days it reached his eyes. I asked Foster that same question. She said helping others was not about the past. It was about the future we could build together. The screen changed to show construction projects on various worlds. Within 6 months, humans were working on every coalition world. Not as conquerors or occupiers, but as partners. They shared their technology freely. They taught us new ways to grow food, to heal diseases, to travel between stars more safely. But the most important thing they shared was not technology. It was an idea. Kethvar paused, letting his words sink in. The idea that different species could work together instead of fighting each other. The auditorium was completely silent. Thousands of beings listened to every word. Ambassador Helen Wright became the human representative to the Galactic Council, the first human ever to address our government. Her speech changed the course of galactic history. The screen showed a small human woman standing before the massive coalition assembly. Wright did not ask for territory or resources or reparations for the war. Instead, she asked for something no species had ever requested before. She asked to join the coalition as an equal member. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Many of them had lived through those historic days. The debate lasted for months. Some council members argued that humans were too dangerous to trust. Others said they were too valuable as allies to reject. But it was a human action, not human words, that settled the question. Kethvar moved to center stage, his voice growing, stronger. The Kraxon homeworld faced invasion by the Devourers, a species from outside our galaxy. The coalition fleet was too far away to help. Kraxon defended itself alone against overwhelming odds. The planet was days away from falling. The screen showed images of a world under attack, its cities burning. Then human ships arrived. Not coalition vessels with human crews, but purely human warships flying Earth's flag. They had traveled across the galaxy to help a species that had fought against them just months before. The battle for Kraxon lasted 3 days. Human and Kraxon soldiers fought side by side. Human pilots died protecting Kraxon cities. Human medics treated Kraxon wounded without hesitation. Kethvar's voice became emotional as he continued. Commander Jake Morrison's son, Lieutenant Carl Morrison, led the final assault against the Devourer flagship. He died destroying it, just as his father had died fighting against us. But this time he died saving lives instead of taking them. The auditorium was so quiet that the air circulation system seemed loud. After the battle, the Kraxon Council voted unanimously to support human membership in the coalition. Within a year, every species had done the same. Humans became not just members but leaders in our alliance. The screen showed current images of mixed human and alien crews working together. Today, human tactics are taught in every military academy. Human psychology is studied by diplomats across the galaxy. Human medicine saves lives on 1,000 worlds. But most importantly, human ideas about cooperation and mercy have changed how we all think about war and peace. An older officer in the front row raised his hand. "Sir, what makes humans so different from the rest of us?" Kethvar considered the question carefully. "I have spent 20 years thinking about that. I believe humans understand something that we are still learning. They know that strength comes not from the ability to destroy your enemies, but from the willingness to turn enemies into friends. They also understand that some things are worth more than life itself: freedom, family, hope for the future. When you fight for those things, you become unstoppable. When you share those things, you become irreplaceable." The screen behind him now showed images from across the galaxy. Human children playing with alien young, mixed crews exploring new worlds, scientists from dozens of species working together on great projects. The war taught us that humans can be the most terrifying enemies in the galaxy, but peace taught us something even more important. They can also be the most loyal friends. Kethvar moved to the edge of the stage, closer to his audience. "Some of you will leave here today and enter military service. Others will become diplomats, scientists, teachers. Whatever path you choose, remember what humans showed us. The greatest victories are not won by destroying your opponents, but by convincing them to stand beside you. The coalition is stronger now than it ever was when we ruled through fear. We have human innovation, human courage, and human compassion, working alongside the best qualities of every member species." A young cadet in the middle section stood up. "Sir, do you ever regret fighting against the humans?" The question hung in the air for a long moment. Kethvar looked at his missing arms, then at the thousands of faces watching him. "I regret the war. I regret the deaths on both sides. I regret that it took so much suffering to teach us what we should have known from the beginning." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "But I do not regret the outcome. The galaxy is a better place because humans are part of it. 20 years ago, I thought humans were monsters. Today, my closest friend is a human veteran named Tom Patterson, brother of the medic who died on New Texas. We work together training young officers to think about war differently." The screen showed one final image: human and alien instructors, teaching mixed classes at military academies across the galaxy. Tom often tells his students that the best way to honor those who died in war is to make sure their children never have to fight the same battles. I believe he is right. Kethvar straightened his shoulders and looked out at the audience one last time. "You are the future of this galaxy. Human and alien young, learning together, growing together, dreaming of tomorrow together. You have the chance to build something even better than what we have achieved so far. Remember what humans taught us. Mercy is not weakness. Compassion is not surrender. Working together is not compromise. It is multiplication. When different species combine their strengths, they become more than the sum of their parts." As Kethvar left the stage, the entire auditorium rose in applause. It was not just recognition of a good speech, but gratitude for lessons learned and wisdom shared. Later that evening, Kethvar stood at his office window, looking out at the academy grounds. Human and alien students walked together in the twilight, their voices mixing in friendly conversation. Tomorrow they would train together, learn together, and perhaps someday serve together in a galaxy where former enemies had become family. In the distance, ships from a dozen worlds rose into the night sky, carrying crews of mixed species to explore new frontiers. Each vessel was a testament to the greatest human victory of all, the triumph of hope over hatred, of understanding over fear. The war had ended 20 years ago, but the peace it created would last forever. The fourth day brought the largest crowd yet. News of Kethvar's lectures had reached the capital. Government officials sat alongside military officers and academy students. Everyone wanted to hear about the day the war changed forever. Kethvar entered the room and saw the packed audience. He nodded slowly. understanding the weight of what he was about to share. Today I will tell you about the moment when everything we believed about war was proven wrong. He moved to the center of the room, his scarred face grave. I will tell you about the day humans showed us mercy. The screen displayed a star map showing the final battle positions. Red and blue dots clustered around a single system. 2 years into the war, the coalition had lost 60% of our forces, not to human weapons but to defections, psychological breakdowns, and soldiers who simply refused to fight anymore. Kethvar pointed to the display. High Command decided on one final assault. We would throw everything we had left at Earth itself. A government official in the back row leaned forward. How many ships remained? 3,000 vessels. Every ship the coalition could spare from across the galaxy. It was the largest attack force ever assembled. Kethavar's voice was flat. Against us, the humans had maybe 200 ships left. Most were damaged from 2 years of fighting. The screen changed to show the massive coalition fleet approaching Earth. I commanded a battlecruiser in the third wave. We expected the final battle to last hours. Earth would fall and the human threat would end forever. Kethavar paused, his remaining hand clenching into a fist. We were wrong about everything. The humans did not try to stop us in space. They let us come. When our fleet reached Earth orbit, we found something impossible. Human ships were evacuating their own planet. The cadets stirred with confusion. This made no sense from a military standpoint. Every human ship was loaded with civilians, children, elderly, families. They were not running away to fight another day. They were trying to save lives. Kethvar moved to the screen and pointed to civilian transports. General Paul Stevens, the human commander, sent us a message. He said Earth was lost, but he asked for safe passage for the civilian ships. Did the coalition agree? Asked a young cadet. Admiral Tekvar laughed. He said the humans were finally showing their true cowardice. He ordered the civilian ships destroyed first, to break human morale. Kethvar's voice became harder. That was when we learned our final lesson about humanity. The screen showed new ship movements. The human military vessels suddenly changed course. The human warships moved to protect the civilian transports, not to attack us but to shield the evacuating families. They put themselves between our weapons and their own people. Kethvar's voice carried an edge of wonder. Every human military ship took defensive positions. They were willing to die to buy time for civilians to escape. An instructor spoke up. That is standard evacuation protocol for any military. No. Kethvar shook his head. What happened next was not standard anything. When Admiral Tekvar ordered the attack on civilian ships, something unprecedented occurred. Coalition vessels began refusing orders. The room fell silent. My ship was ordered to target a human transport carrying children. My weapons officer, a Zephyrian named Veltar, turned to me and said he would not fire on young ones. My navigator, a Kraxan, said the same thing. One by one, my entire crew refused to follow orders. Kethvar sat down, his legs seeming suddenly weak. It was not just my ship. Across the entire fleet, coalition soldiers were refusing to fire on civilians. We had spent 2 years watching humans protect their families, their wounded, their weak. We could not bring ourselves to kill the very people they had died to save. The screen showed chaos in the coalition fleet formation. Ships were breaking away from attack positions. Admiral Tekvar tried to maintain order. He threatened court, martial, execution, imprisonment. But you cannot threaten people who have already decided that some things are wrong. Half the fleet simply stopped fighting. What did General Stevens do? Asked a cadet. Something that no military commander in galactic history had ever done. He offered to surrender. Kethvar's voice was barely above a whisper. Stevens broadcast a message to our entire fleet. He said he would turn himself over to coalition custody if we would allow the civilian transports to reach safety. The government, officials in the back exchanged glances. This was not in any official war record. But Stevens was not finished. He made one more offer. He said any coalition ship that was damaged or in distress could dock with human vessels for repairs and medical aid. He offered to help the very people who had come to destroy his world. Kethvar stood up slowly, his movements careful and deliberate. That was when the miracle happened. My ship had been damaged in an earlier battle. Our life support was failing, our engines barely worked. General Stevens personally guided us to a docking bay on a human ship called the Liberty. The screen showed a human vessel with coalition ships attached to its hull. When I boarded the Liberty, I expected to be taken prisoner. Instead, human medics began treating my wounded crew. Human engineers worked to repair our ship. Human cooks prepared food that was safe for our species to eat. They were helping their enemies? A cadet sounded disbelieving. They were helping people in need. That is what Stevens told me when I asked why. He said that once the fighting stopped, we were not enemies anymore. We were just beings who needed help. Kethvar moved to the window looking out at the academy grounds. I spent 3 days on that human ship. I watched human children play in the corridors while coalition prisoners worked alongside human crew members to repair damage. I saw a human doctor save the life of a Veterantiy soldier who had been trying to kill humans just hours before. The doctor's name was Karen Liu. She worked for 18 hours straight to save that soldier's life. When I asked her why, she said it was because life had value, no matter where it came from. The room was completely still. Even the government officials seemed moved by the story. On the 3rd day, Ambassador Liu asked to speak with me. She was a small human woman, barely reaching my shoulder. But when she spoke, her words carried more power than any weapon. "What did she say?" whispered a cadet. She asked me a question that changed my life. She said, "What are you really fighting for?" Kethvar turned back to face the room. I told her I was fighting for the coalition, for order, for civilization. She nodded and then asked, "But what are you fighting for in your heart?" Kethvar's voice cracked slightly. I realized I did not know. I had been fighting because I was ordered to fight. But the humans were fighting for something real. For their families, their freedom, their right to exist. They had something worth dying for. And we had nothing worth killing for. Ambassador Liu made me an offer. She said the war could end, not with surrender but with understanding. She said humans did not want to destroy the coalition. They just wanted to live in peace. The screen showed a document with signatures from multiple species. 3 days later, Admiral Tekvar signed the first ceasefire agreement, not because he was defeated, but because he could not continue a war against people who had shown mercy to his own soldiers. Kethvar gathered his materials, his movements slow and thoughtful. The war did not end with a great battle or a decisive victory. It ended because humans taught us that mercy is stronger than violence, that compassion is more powerful than conquest. "Tomorrow," he said, looking at the faces around the room, "I will tell you about what happened after the war ended, about how former enemies became the closest of allies, about how humans changed not just the coalition, but the entire galaxy." As people filed out of the room, many stopped to speak with Kethvar. Government officials asked questions about policy. Military officers discussed tactics, but it was a young cadet who asked the question that mattered most. "Sir, do you think humans are better than us?" Kethvar considered the question for a long moment. "No, young one. I think they are what we could be, if we choose to be." Outside, the stars were beginning to appear in the evening sky. Somewhere among them, human ships traveled peacefully alongside coalition vessels, carrying the dream of a better future for all species in the galaxy.